Beginnings in North Carolina. Hello and welcome. Let me set the scene for you. Our story kicks off in the heart of North Carolina, a state tucked along the southeastern seaboard of the United States, where the Atlantic's salt breeze mingles with the earthy aroma of the Blue Ridge Mountains. North Carolina is a fascinating blend. Its landscape stretches from the wild, windswept Outer Banks beaches to the shadowy, mysterious forests of the Smoky Mountains. Small towns hold tight to traditions born from centuries of pioneering, while cities like Charlotte and Raleigh pulse with the lifeblood of modern industry and innovation. In every sense, it's a crossroads of old and new, where tobacco fields and textile mills rub shoulders with bustling tech startups, microbreweries, and art galleries. Back in the year 2000, North Carolina was a place of energy. College basketball fever swept through university campuses, NASCAR roared in the air, and suburban strip malls popped up faster than wildflowers in spring. Despite the growing suburbs and surging commerce, many communities there prided themselves on being neighborly and safe. People knew each other by name, and the idea of a serious crime was often just something you watched on an episode of America's Most Wanted. But underneath that calm, a shadow began to creep. That shadow was the arrival of a figure who would become both urban legend and local nightmare. Someone so elusive that witnesses swore he could walk through walls or vanish into thin air. Rumors began swirling after midnight break-ins at various McDonald's restaurants across the state. The targets were always eerily similar: quiet franchise locations on the edge of town, closed for business, wrapped in silence except for the hum of neon. Each time police arrived to find a mysterious, perfectly cut hole through the roof, just wide enough for a grown man to slip through, lowering himself like a phantom in the night. These rooftop burglaries left the state's law enforcement agencies scratching their heads. There were rarely fingerprints, no real evidence, and the alarms, if triggered, always lagged just a minute too late, as if the culprit knew the security system's every secret. Soon, the myth of the man on the roof was whispered in break rooms and over drive-through headsets. Fast food workers started looking over their shoulders, and small-town police doubled their patrols. But in other circles, North Carolinians speculated this was no ordinary thief. Stories went around that he was military-trained or even some kind of disgruntled genius gone rogue. Who was behind the break-ins? Why target McDonald's? How was he always a step ahead? The legend began to spread beyond state lines, catching the eyes of both local and national media. It's against this backdrop of tradition and transformation, of Southern warmth and gathering unease, that our story unfolds. A place where life could change overnight from ordinary to extraordinary, and where the face behind the crime would remain a mystery for far longer than anyone thought possible. The Phantom on McDonald's rooftops. As the new millennium dawned, North Carolina found itself gripped by a mysterious crime wave unlike anything the state had seen before. The heart of this enigma wasn't some fast-talking gangster or high-tech hacker. He was a literal phantom, a figure who operated under cover of darkness with almost supernatural stealth and precision. His targets: McDonald's restaurants scattered all across the state. It began innocuously enough. On quiet nights, managers arriving to open their stores would find things out of place. A faint draft from the ceiling, footprints where none should be, the unmistakable evidence that someone had been inside. Cash would be missing from the safe, but otherwise, the scene remained eerily untouched. Security footage turned up nothing. Alarm systems seemed never to trigger. The police, initially baffled, began referring to the perpetrator as the Roof Man. But among the workers and late-night employees, he became an urban legend, the Phantom on McDonald's rooftops. The technique was audacious and yet simple. The Roof Man would surveil different McDonald's locations, selecting those with the least nighttime activity and familiarity with their shift routines. Under the cover of darkness, he'd scale the building, often slipping into the shadows behind closed businesses or deserted parking lots. Armed with a portable drill and an array of burglary tools, he would bore a hole, just large enough for a grown man to slip through, in the restaurant's rooftop. The holes were expertly placed, often hidden away behind HVAC units or signage where they'd remain unseen. The Phantom would silently drop down into a locked restroom, sometimes waiting for hours until the store opened. What separated this burglar from most was not merely his method, but his control and confidence. He rarely left signs of forced entry. Stories circulated among McDonald's employees of arriving in the early hours of the morning, only to be confronted by a masked man who, polite but firm, demanded the combination to the safe. He would instruct staff to sit quietly and cooperate, often employing a tone of respect almost at odds with the gravity of the moment. To those unlucky enough to be caught in his presence, he came across not as a savage criminal, but as an eerie, calm professional, someone who'd rehearsed these very scenarios dozens of times. Terrified employees recounted being shepherded into walk-in refrigerators, sometimes handed jackets with the warning, "You're going to want to stay warm. This won't take long." He disarmed security devices, coolly gathered his cash, and vanished as silently as he had arrived. A dispatch to the police would be met with sirens and cruisers fanning out across the night, but inevitably, the roofman would have already slipped away into the dim early hours, leaving law enforcement frustrated and workers shaken. Within a few months, the string of robberies gained regional notoriety. Local news stations caught wind of this ghost-like criminal, reporting breathlessly on each new rooftop break-in and stoking public anxiety. Franchise owners installed extra locks and cameras, but it didn't slow him down. In fact, his confidence appeared to grow with each success. Some wondered if he was toying with law enforcement, as several times he narrowly escaped moments before being apprehended. Occasionally his shadowy figure was glimpsed darting across alleyways or disappearing into wooded lots behind the restaurants. Despite the mounting pressure, the pattern of crimes became almost ritualistic. Always McDonald's, always at night, always an entrance from above. The nickname "the Phantom" on McDonald's rooftops soon spread beyond North Carolina, and rumors began to swirl. Who was this mysterious intruder? Was he former military, a disgruntled ex-employee, or was he, as some whispered, simply unnaturally lucky? The legend only deepened with the reveal that he was not confined to just one city or even one state. Reports trickled in from South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, even as far as Ohio, every one of them the same: a rooftop entry, a silent intrusion, terrified employees treated with an unnerving politesse, and tidy bundles of cash spirited away into the night. Through it all, the people of North Carolina watched and waited. Locksmiths grew busy, nervous laughter filled break rooms, and the police grew more determined. But the Phantom kept dancing across the rooftops, a living, breathing paradox, a courteous bandit who haunted the golden arches long after closing time. In some strange sense, he became a mirror for the times, anonymous, unpredictable, both terrifying and strangely fascinating. For a while in North Carolina, every flat rooftop at every McDonald's felt like a portal for a ghost, and no one could sleep soundly until the sun came up. The fateful early morning encounter. It was the kind of early morning where the world felt half awake, dew still clinging to the grass, the streets of small-town North Carolina washed in a silvery gray dawn. It was exactly 5 a.m. on a Saturday, and the McDonald's on Beaumont Road was just starting to buzz to life. Inside, a skeleton crew of employees prepared for the day, brewing coffee, counting register drawers, slicing tomatoes, and gossiping softly to chase away the lingering sleepiness. Suddenly the steady, comforting routine was shattered. From the shadows of the staff restroom, a masked figure lunged into the main kitchen. He moved with brisk, unwavering purpose, clutching a .22 caliber rifle in gloved hands, his entire body language radiating chilling intent. The employees froze in place, instincts for flight swamped by primal fear. Every story they'd heard about the rooftop Phantom seemed to materialize before their eyes. But almost immediately, something about the tense scene veered into the strange rather than outright chaos. The man didn't bark threats or scream at them. Instead, his voice had an unsettling courtesy. "Everyone, please sit down," he instructed, his tone almost polite, yet leaving little room for refusal. It was the kind of politeness that made the moment twice as terrifying. One young woman, too shocked to move, remained rooted behind the counter, trembling. With disarming calm, the intruder turned to her and said, "Ma'am, please, would you mind sitting down on the floor for me? Could you lie down, just for your safety?" The words were gentle, but the rifle in his hands made any disobedience unthinkable. As the employees hastened to obey, the masked man efficiently corralled them into the walk-in freezer. "You might want to grab a jacket, it's cold in there," he mentioned almost offhandedly, as if he were a host showing guests the way, not a criminal committing armed robbery. Inside the cramped chill of the freezer, the staff huddled together, dazed and praying this would all soon be over. Meanwhile, holding his rifle steady, the intruder forced the store manager to open the safe. His manner remained bizarrely measured, his words, though quiet, suggested complete control. Within minutes he gathered up the stacks of cash, strikingly businesslike in his efficiency. The security alarms were idle, the windows looked out across empty parking lots as dawn crept upward. Yet amidst his eccentric professionalism, there was always an undercurrent of danger. When one employee hesitated too long, the man rapped the barrel of his gun against the metal of the counter, just loud enough to remind everyone that beneath the calm exterior lurked real menace. There was no question, cooperation was vital, resistance would be punished. While the crime was unfolding, one quick-thinking employee managed to discreetly tap the emergency security alarm button hidden under a prep table. Unaware of the silent alarm, the intruder completed his heist and melted away, disappearing out the utility entrance as quietly as he had come. Moments after, the distant sound of sirens filled the morning air. Police descended on the fast food restaurant within minutes, securing the scene, checking on the shaken staff, and surveying the scene for evidence. Their search led them to a stand of shrubs just a short distance from the building, where they quickly found discarded burglary tools, a drill, a crowbar, a set of lockpicks, and the .22 rifle itself. It wasn't long before they discovered the thief himself, huddled in the tall grass, trying to catch his breath, still clutching the now empty cash bag. The revelation was swift and shocking. Underneath the mask was Jeffrey Allen Manchester, a name familiar to law enforcement across multiple states but always, until now, just out of reach. Rather than raging or despairing at his arrest, he gave the officers a wry smile and a cryptic compliment. "Good job today, officers." Back inside the McDonald's, the evidence the police pieced together painted the whole picture. There was the telltale hole expertly drilled in the rooftop. They learned that, as per his chilling modus operandi, Manchester had slipped into the restaurant the night before, lying in wait in the bathroom for hours until the morning crew arrived. His method had worked for so long, slipping into empty restaurants, commandeering the opening routines, ghosting away with the loot, but the combination of sharp staff and a bit of luck had now brought the saga to a halt. For the traumatized team, the surreal blend of politeness and violence would haunt their memory, an event that, while it lasted only minutes, shattered their sense of safety forever. In those brief moments, their world had collided with one of America's most notorious, unpredictable criminals. The Phantom was finally a ghost no longer. The legend faded as the reality, startling, dangerous, and all too human, emerged into the daylight. Captured in a split second. The pre-dawn stillness that clung to the McDonald's parking lot was pierced by the wail of approaching sirens. In the immediate aftermath of the robbery, the employees huddled together for warmth and comfort, adrenaline still surging through their veins as they relived the surreal, terrifying moments just endured. Outside, red and blue emergency lights flickered against the whitened pavement. Local law enforcement had arrived on scene with impressive speed, thanks to the silent alarm triggered by the sharp-thinking employee. Within minutes, uniformed officers swarmed the perimeter. They moved efficiently, the kind of alert, purposeful response honed by years of dealing with routine break-ins, but now fueled by weeks of mounting pressure and frustration. The Phantom had taunted them for too long. Heads were on a swivel as they fanned out across the property, their flashlights arcing over dark corners, trash receptacles, fencing, and clumps of low bushes. The McDonald's rooftop was swiftly checked for any remaining evidence. There it was, a small, perfectly drilled hole, the latest calling card in the suspect's string of mysterious break-ins. A crowbar glinted in the faint light, dropped amidst some scattered tar paper. The officers conferred in hushed voices, each one alert to any sign of movement in the chilly morning air. Then, one officer's beam caught the glint of something metallic behind a dense patch of scrub near the edge of the parking lot. Approaching with caution, the officer barked a command, "Show your hands!" There, half submerged in dewy, trampled grass, they found the elusive perpetrator. Jeffrey Allen Manchester, still clad in dark clothes and gloves, tried for all of 1 second to melt further into the shadows, but after weeks on the run, exhaustion had dulled his edge. He raised his hands, locked eyes with the officer, and, unexpectedly, broke into a tired, almost wry smile. No desperate escape, no final act of violence, just surrender, and an odd sense of resignation. As officers converged, he offered up what sounded almost like a compliment. "You guys are quick this morning." The police wasted no time. Manchester was swiftly cuffed, frisked, and guided back to the waiting cruisers. On his person, they found critical evidence. The .22 rifle used in the holdup, a mask, latex gloves, and a zippered bag still containing stacks of cash. Tucked in his jacket were various burglary tools. A portable drill, a set of picks, even a screwdriver and a compact sledgehammer. Everything about him, the tools, the planning, the methodical execution, spoke not of a spur-of-the-moment criminal, but of someone who had rehearsed and refined his craft to an unsettling degree. Back inside the restaurant, staff and officers pieced together the bizarre juxtaposition of graciousness and threat. The man who'd told them to bundle up before entering the freezer, who had spoken softly even as he waved a gun, but who'd been fully prepared to intimidate or harm anyone who disobeyed. For the detectives on scene, this demeanor was just as chilling as any weapon. Once at the station, processing Manchester became an event in itself. His name instantly caused a stir. Not only was it known locally, but police realized they were face to face with the man responsible for a wave of sophisticated rooftop burglaries across multiple states. Word quickly rippled through the department and a sense of cautious victory, tinged with relief, settled in. Manchester himself, in stark contrast to the fear he inspired, appeared almost relaxed. He spoke to the booking officers with an odd courtesy, commending their speed, offering no resistance, and answering basic questions without protest or bravado. Even now, freshly caught, there was something almost theatrical about him, an enigmatic shade of charisma that both baffled and unsettled everyone present. Later, as police combed through piles of evidence, they realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. The tools matched those found at previous break-ins. The method of entry, drilling through the roof and lying in wait, had been confirmed by the hole in the McDonald's ceiling. A pattern that had frustrated and eluded law enforcement for months had finally been brought to an abrupt end, not in a blaze of violence, but in the quiet inevitability of capture. One that would be dissected in briefing rooms, splashed across newspapers, and replayed in the minds of those who had hunted the Phantom for so long. For the police, for the staff, and perhaps even for Manchester himself, it felt like a dam had finally broken. The reign of the roofman, the Phantom atop the Golden Arches, was over, caught in a split second that would alter lives, reputations, and local legends for years to come. A multifaceted criminal profile. As the details of the McDonald's rooftop break-in and the bizarre arrest began to circulate, law enforcement and the broader community found themselves grappling with a single urgent question. Who was Jeffrey Allen Manchester? The man behind the Phantom's mask was more than just an ordinary criminal. His background, skill set, and unusual demeanor created a complex psychological portrait, a puzzle that investigators and journalists alike were eager to solve. Digging into Manchester's past, police unearthed a story that defied the stereotypes of a typical career thief. Born and raised in California, Jeffrey was described as an exceptionally intelligent, resourceful child. His parents, both teachers, thrilled at his early academic achievements. He excelled in mathematics, was a voracious reader, and showed a knack for fixing mechanical objects around the house. Friends and neighbors recalled a quiet, polite boy, competitive but never aggressive, someone who respected authority and shunned trouble. As a teenager, Manchester chose a disciplined path and joined the Army, not just any unit but the legendary 82nd Airborne Division. There, he distinguished himself as a quick study, taking to parachuting, tactical movement, and survival training with ease. His instructors noted his ability to focus under pressure, his meticulous attention to detail, and above all, his calm in stressful situations. Deployment took him away from home, but it also shaped his personality. Manchester learned firsthand the value of patience, stealth, and strategy, traits that would later define his criminal career. But even as he developed physically and mentally, cracks began to show beneath the surface. Fellow soldiers would later recall that Jeffrey was intensely private, rarely socializing outside of training. He approached every problem with almost obsessive precision, sometimes disappearing for hours to work alone or lose himself in books on engineering, psychology, even philosophy. He respected the regimented life of a soldier, but hints of disillusionment crept in as he served multiple tours. Stories of his isolated, reflective nature swirled among his unit, with some describing him as brilliant but distant. After separating from the military, Manchester appeared to follow the classic American trajectory. He married, became a father to 3 children, and initially settled down near a naval facility in San Diego. Outwardly, he played the role of a devoted family man, attending school functions, coaching Little League, and volunteering in the community. To casual acquaintances, he was friendly, almost charming, if a bit reserved. His wife, however, began to notice his mercurial moods and habit of disappearing at odd hours. The real break with normalcy occurred following a painful divorce. Manchester lost custody of his children amid allegations of domestic violence, which he strenuously denied but which nonetheless destroyed his family life and sense of direction. Friends would later say this was the turning point. Untethered from his family and plagued by a growing sense of failure, he grew increasingly withdrawn, forsaking stable work for aimless travel and odd jobs. Masking his pain behind his disciplined exterior, he began to apply his military expertise to darker pursuits. The meticulousness that once helped him thrive in the army now found a new, illicit purpose. Manchester's transformation into a criminal mastermind didn't occur overnight. Initially, he stuck to petty theft and minor break-ins, careful to target empty buildings or isolated establishments where the risk to himself and others was minimal. But as his confidence and desperation grew, so did the ambition of his schemes. He noticed something peculiar about McDonald's restaurant rooftops. Their architecture was standardized, many were located just off highways, and late at night, most were minimally staffed. It was the perfect formula for low-risk, high-reward burglaries. He invested hours in reconnaissance, walking past restaurants at different times, noting routines, and studying blueprints he found in public records. Manchester's approach was scientific, almost academic, turning every aspect of a heist into a problem to be solved. He engineered portable kits consisting of cordless drills, custom-made crowbars, and even homemade listening devices. Everything was rehearsed, from entry and exit to neutralizing alarm systems and minimizing confrontation. Psychologists who later examined his record debated whether he fit the classic mold of an antisocial personality. On one hand, he displayed hallmark traits: calculated risk-taking, emotional coldness, and the ability to calmly manipulate or deceive both his victims and pursuers. On the other, there was a perplexing layer of civility. Witnesses remarked upon his politeness, the absence of gratuitous violence, and his tendency to treat hostages with a strange, almost courteous concern. This duality fascinated and unsettled almost everyone who had dealings with him. Detectives examining his life found no clear-cut answer, no single childhood trauma or infamous catalyst for his slide into crime. Instead, Manchester's criminal profile seemed to hover uneasily at the crossroads of opportunity, personal loss, and a mind shaped by both discipline and alienation. He was capable of rigorous self-control, but equally prone to periods of dangerous impulsivity. Even among law enforcement, opinions differed sharply. Some saw him as an ice-cold sociopath, exploiting his talents for personal gain without remorse. Others wondered if, deep down, he was a casualty of circumstance, a man unable to heal from emotional wounds who pursued control and validation where he could no longer find it in his personal life. To his neighbors he remained a cipher, the friendly if quiet man who lived next door, unexpectedly revealed as the infamous Roofman. But perhaps the most chilling part of Manchester's profile was its unpredictability. He was a man of masks, capable of deception both literal and figurative, adapting to each new environment and forever keeping his would-be hunters one step behind. In the end, his criminal record would span years and states, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions about what truly drives a mind like his to dance so gracefully onto and off the rooftops of America. Personal tragedy turns to crime. Behind the headlines and police reports detailing Manchester's exploits was a human story riddled with loss and despair, a tale familiar in its patterns, yet singular in its aftermath. The seeds of his criminal evolution were sown long before he ever set foot on a McDonald's rooftop or drilled his first covert entryway. After his discharge from the military, Jeffrey struggled to adapt to civilian life. Though he briefly found anchor in marriage and fatherhood, pain and personal conflict lurked not far below the surface. His wife's accusations of domestic violence, claims he vehemently denied, ripped his family apart, resulting in a bitter divorce and a devastating loss of custody over his 3 beloved children. The enormity of that rupture shattered his sense of identity. The disciplined soldier who'd once thrived on structure now found himself unmoored, isolated, and adrift within a hostile system. The stigma and legal barriers that came with his divorce started to close in. Jeffrey, grappling with shame and helplessness, watched from a distance as his former life slipped further out of reach. He cycled endlessly through odd jobs, couch-surfed between old friends, and wrestled with mounting depression. At first, there was little outward sign that he might turn to crime. If anything, he seemed quieter, almost spectral, drifting in and out of the margins wherever he went. But for someone with his background, trained in patience, surveillance, and tactical improvisation, the temptation of easy victories grew. Left unchecked, his need for validation and control evolved from unhealthy coping mechanisms into calculated acts. No longer bound by the responsibilities of family or the watchful order of the army, Manchester's internal world steadily darkened. The underlying logic he once applied to discipline and self-improvement was redirected toward planning, reconnaissance, and ultimately his infamous rooftop break-ins. It wasn't simple greed that propelled him forward, nor was he driven solely by the thrill of the chase. In the long shadows between dusk and dawn, motivations blurred, a desire for revenge against a society that had, in his eyes, unfairly cast him out, a desperate need to prove that he could stay 3 steps ahead when everything else in his life had descended into chaos. Each successful heist temporarily staunched the ache of loss, reaffirming his skills in a world that otherwise offered only reminders of failure. In another life, maybe Manchester's resourcefulness would have built businesses or inspired teams, but in the aftermath of his personal tragedy, his ingenuity and discipline became the very tools of his undoing. Little by little, his criminal activities transformed him from a faceless man in a crowd into the notorious ghost who haunted America's golden arches, proof that even the sharpest minds can spiral into darkness when the heart's wounds go unhealed. A string of crimes, America's infamous rooftop man. From the waning years of the 1990s into the dawn of the new millennium, newspapers and television broadcasts from coast to coast began to whisper about a new kind of burglar stalking the night, the so-called rooftop man. While North Carolina would become the stage for his most notorious heist and eventual downfall, his criminal resume already stretched across state lines, with a trail of mystery threaded through dozens of towns and cities. Jeffrey Allen Manchester's modus operandi became a legend in its own right. Between 1998 and 2000, at least 40 break-ins and robberies were attributed to him, mostly at McDonald's but also at other fast food franchises. His technique was both uniform and bizarrely effective. He would identify isolated restaurant sites, methodically surveil the premises for days, and then, under the cloak of night, hoist himself onto their flat rooftops. He avoided windows and doors, instead drilling through the roof above hidden corridors or restrooms, slipping inside quietly before staff ever arrived. Once in, the narrative repeated itself like a well-rehearsed play. Staff were confronted in the early morning, usually treated with an unnerving politeness, and then herded into freezers or restrooms while the safe was emptied. The locks, the cameras, the alarms, Manchester seemed to anticipate them all. Police records from California, Oregon, Virginia, Massachusetts, and other states revealed eerily similar accounts. Wherever the rooftop man struck, panic rippled through local law enforcement. After every job, he vanished before a single tire squealed onto the scene. His audacity matured with every heist. On certain occasions, investigators would later discover, Manchester took elaborate steps to throw off pursuit, changing disguises, using police scanners to monitor response times, and even circling back to the crime scene after sunrise to blend in with crowds or survey police activity. He spent hours studying architectural plans, security routines, employee schedules. His commitment to outsmarting the system bordered on obsessive. As the crimes continued to mount, so did the fear and fascination they inspired. The rooftop burglar became a folk villain and a cautionary tale in neighborhoods stretching far beyond his original West Coast haunts. Small business owners and chain restaurants responded with upgrades, reinforcing rooftops, installing additional motion sensors, and holding staff safety drills. In police stations from California to Massachusetts, detectives started to develop informal working groups to share findings, piecing together the profile and tactics of a criminal whose face was still unknown, but whose style was instantly recognizable. The media played its part in amplifying the legend. Local news broadcasts described the burglar as part cat burglar, part magician, marveling at how he could seemingly walk through walls. National magazines speculated about his military background, with one article calling him the ultimate ghost in a world of locks and codes. Pop culture in turn spun stories and inspired copycat rumors, a whole genre of urban myth forming around one urban bandit. Parents warned their children to lock up tight. Fast food workers swapped stories of what they'd do if they came face to face with the rooftop man. Despite the chaos left in his wake, actual violence remained rare, a detail that perplexed criminal profilers. Manchester preferred to outwit, not overpower, his victims. Witnesses remembered his calm, his courtesy, and the peculiar chill he left in every empty restaurant. For all his notoriety, the rooftop man was not truly feared for cruelty, but for cunning, for the simple fact that neither police nor public ever knew where or when he might strike next. Over time, what started as regional headlines amassed into an FBI-level manhunt. Case files ballooned with evidence, grainy surveillance stills, abandoned tools, DNA traces, and shoe prints in rooftop gravel. The elusive qualities of the rooftop man forced agencies that rarely collaborated to share insights and pool resources. Even then, Manchester's actions managed to stay just ahead of the netcast to catch him. His code of operation was ever-evolving, incorporating lessons from every close call, a living, breathing chess player in a game with dozens of opponents. Yet amid the legends and the chase, there was a paradox embedded in Manchester's legacy. For all his criminal ingenuity, the larger-than-life rooftop man remained oddly invisible. Outside the fleeting encounters at dawn with startled workers, no one truly saw him. He lived in the space between headlines and half-remembered stories, a cipher whose every break-in layered another mask over his real, troubled identity. In the end, Jeffrey Manchester's string of rooftop burglaries would carve his name into American criminal lore. His method imitated by amateurs, his capture celebrated as the end of a strange chapter in law enforcement history. But in every retelling, the core fascination endured. Not just what he did, but how he made people feel. A blend of amazement and dread that lingered long after police closed each case file and newscasts moved on. The daring prison escape. After his high-profile trial and a decades-long sentence handed down by the court, Jeffrey Allen Manchester vanished from public view, at least for a time. Union County Correctional Facility was built for security, engineered with the lessons of countless attempted escapes in mind. Double gates, towering fences strung with razor wire, round-the-clock surveillance, and guards clocking every movement. For most inmates it was a dead end. But Manchester, ever patient and meticulous, saw its routines as puzzles to be solved rather than cages impossible to breach. He started small. Manchester volunteered for every work detail, especially those relating to the prison's industrial laundry. He made mental notes on guard patterns, schedules, and which doors seemed most neglected. Over weeks he mapped out every blind spot, observed which trucks entered and left the secured perimeter, and even took notice of the changing of the seasons, rainy days when visibility was lower, for example, or holidays with lighter staffing. Blending in with other inmates, he quietly cultivated the image of a model prisoner, a man resigned to his fate, biding his time. What the guards failed to realize was just how far Manchester's ingenuity would take him. Using stolen bits of cardboard, scrap cloth, and stray paint, he fashioned a convincing barrier inside a laundry cart. Manchester timed his escape to coincide with a shift change during a torrential downpour, when visibility was at its worst, and procedures were sometimes rushed. Crawling into the cramped space, shielded by piles of uniforms and his handmade false wall, he held his breath for the final nerve-wracking ride through the security checkpoint. Risks abounded. At any moment a guard could probe the laundry, notice a discrepancy, or simply decide to tip over the cart. But luck favored him, or perhaps as with most of his exploits, fortune obeyed preparation. The cart rolled out, bumps and voices fading behind as Manchester was transported undetected out of the prison walls. Once beyond the grounds he quickly slipped free from the cart and crawled into a dense stand of trees bordering the prison complex. For hours he lay still, fighting the pain of cramped limbs and waiting for dusk. Only then, with silence as his cover and adrenaline driving him forward, did he begin to move, blending into the fringes of society with all the skills a decade of calculated crime had given him. By the time the prison's head count flagged one body short, Manchester was miles away, soaked, hungry, exhausted but exultant. His escape sent waves of panic through law enforcement circles. How could someone so notorious simply vanish from a high-security facility? News reports buzzed with speculation and fear. Manchester wasn't just loose, he was at liberty, armed with experience and, if anything, more determined than ever not to be caught. Hiding in the heart of the city, after slipping through the cracks of the prison's supposedly impenetrable defenses, Jeffrey Allen Manchester didn't rush for the state line or seek refuge in isolated backwoods like in so many Hollywood escape tales. Instead, he did what few would dare imagine. He melted into the very heart of urban society, choosing the bustling yet anonymous edges of the city of Charlotte as his hiding place. Manchester's first move was pure brilliance in its audacity. While the police flooded highways, set up roadblocks, and checked rural bus stations for any sign of the infamous escapee, he quietly surveyed the fringe districts of Charlotte for the perfect lair. He found one in a long-abandoned Toys R Us store, resting beside a half-defunct electronics supercenter. To an ordinary passerby, the place held nothing but echoes of laughter and memories of cut-rate holiday sales. For Manchester, it represented both camouflage and opportunity. With the steady patience of an engineer, he set to work transforming his hideout. Entering under cover of darkness, he drilled and scraped his way through the building's drywall, carefully selecting a corner under the stairwell that was virtually invisible to anyone not actively searching. Over the course of several days, Manchester built himself an almost cinematic secret suite, walls lined with discarded insulation for warmth, stolen extension cords snaked to nearby outlets, and a makeshift bed disguised among piles of unopened board games. He scavenged the store's forgotten inventory, leaving barely a trace of his presence, and even rigged together a surveillance system by repurposing old video monitors with cables pilfered from the adjacent supercenter. During the day, the fugitive operated on a strict schedule, rarely venturing outside his lair until the dark of night cloaked him. He survived off snacks, canned goods, and the occasional foray into dumpsters behind nearby restaurants. Manchester's military and criminal experience came into play. He lifted his fingerprints from every surface, swept for dust trails, avoided triggering motion sensor lights, and minimized unnecessary noise. The goal was simple: become a ghost once more, but this time in plain sight amid the daily churn of urban life. But Jeffrey wasn't simply hunkered down. He kept his ear tuned to the local news, frequented a 24-hour gym nearby to clean up and blend in, and made mental notes of neighborhood routines, delivery truck schedules, janitorial rounds, even patrol shifts of off-duty cops moonlighting as mall security. The narrative of a desperate man on the run twisted into something much more methodical, a masterclass in urban evasion, where confidence bordered on audacity. Manchester's ability to adapt was nothing short of remarkable. He soon realized that remaining completely invisible might actually raise suspicion, so he crafted a cover identity rooted in the local landscape. Using bits of secondhand clothing and items salvaged from donation bins, he managed to look like a down-on-his-luck but harmless wanderer, a face easily forgotten in the endless shuffle of city life. On weekends he walked the neighborhood, occasionally exchanging casual greetings at a laundromat or corner store, being careful never to linger too long nor be too memorable. Despite his isolation, Manchester remained acutely aware of everything happening beyond his makeshift walls. Through old radios and televisions, he listened intently to news reports detailing the massive manhunt underway. Cautious, he set up escape routes, a loose ceiling tile here, an emergency exit there, a network of fallback plans in case the authorities ever drew too close. Even the toys, scooters, and bikes left abandoned in the store became props in his elaborate charade. He kept a child-sized helmet near the front, ready to mislead police into thinking street kids, not a notorious fugitive, might be the ones trespassing at night. The paradox of Manchester's existence was uncanny. Each night, with the glow of city lights filtering through cracked windows, he watched people living normal lives, shoppers wheeling carts across parking lots, teenagers gathering outside burger joints, church vans picking up kids for youth group. He longed for a return to these simpler routines, yet every time loneliness threatened to take over, he reminded himself, blending in was survival. The less he interacted, the longer he could maintain his urban camouflage. Nevertheless, his restless mind pushed him to take calculated risks. As the week stretched on, Manchester found ways to reconnect, however peripherally, with the rhythms of suburban life. At night, he explored abandoned corners of the strip mall, sometimes lingering just long enough to eavesdrop on late-shift employees swapping stories, or to swipe a discarded receipt from a fast food counter. Anything to remind himself that the world outside hadn't entirely forgotten about him. Sometimes he scribbled notes, listing weaknesses in the security of surrounding businesses, not necessarily to exploit, but as an exercise in keeping his senses razor-sharp. Manchester's ambitious hideaway was equal parts survivalist bunker and lonely urban bunker. He came to map every inch of the shopping complex, noting which doors stuck in humid weather, and when the traffic light at the corner would back up enough to cloak a midnight sprint across the street. Occasionally, he witnessed police cruisers circle the parking lot, seemingly random but to him signals of a hunt that never stopped. His pulse always spiked in these moments, yet his careful precautions paid off. He remained invisible, save for faint scuff marks and the rare glimpse of a shadow on security footage, a mystery the authorities never solved in time. In many ways, Manchester's urban hiding became a twisted testament to his ingenuity and discipline. While the city bustled around him, he was the last person anyone would suspect was living secretly among them, a ghost in the fluorescent labyrinth of suburban sprawl, plotting survival one day at a time. Community integration, living with two faces, Jeffrey Allen Manchester's post-escape phase was less about hiding in shadows and more about mastering the dazzling exposure of ordinary life. He realized quickly that remaining truly invisible in a bustling, interconnected urban landscape would inevitably attract suspicion. Instead, he chose a strategy as audacious as his robberies: deliberate integration into the very community he was hiding from. Armed with a new alias and forged documents, Manchester transformed himself into a model citizen, or at least a plausible facsimile. He picked a neighborhood not far from the church he'd started attending, and slowly ingratiated himself with local residents. Carefully observing the rituals of suburban life, Manchester attended neighborhood events, lent a hand at food drives, and even struck up friendships with staff at the local coffee shop. He knew just how much small talk to engage in, when to offer a wry joke, and, more importantly, when to deflect deeper questions about his past. Every day was another performance, an ever-evolving persona sculpted for whatever company he kept. His participation at the church grew from occasional services to volunteering for youth programs and assisting with community outreach. The congregation embraced him, charmed by his apparent sincerity, generosity, and the soft-spoken empathy he extended to struggling families. Manchester, in a sense, found substitutes for his lost family and former identity. Outsiders only saw a kind, single man who gave toys to underprivileged children and always had a moment for those in need. He learned names, remembered details, and quickly built a reputation as someone trustworthy, quietly nurturing the supportive network that would ultimately serve as his unofficial shield against suspicion. This duality expanded into his romantic life. When he met Lily, a newly divorced mother of three, Manchester's charm was fully on display. Attentive, thoughtful, and seemingly stable, he stepped easily into the vacant role of friend and potential partner. To Lily and her friends, he exuded a sort of mysterious competence that was hard to resist, good with children, unfazed by chaos, imbued with an appealing sense of steady calm. He spent holidays and weekends at her house, fixing small repairs, helping the kids with homework, and generally presenting the image of a reliable figure. Ironically, all while using the same skills that had helped him evade capture for years. Yet the split between Manchester's constructed persona and his true identity remained ever present. Even as he volunteered at fundraisers or shared meals with neighbors, he never let himself relax completely. Every routine gesture, from waving to joggers on their morning route to playing Santa at the church Christmas party, was weighed for its strategic value. He maintained careful boundaries, rarely allowing anyone into his living space, and offered plausible explanations for any gaps in his story. Friends sometimes remarked on his reticence about the past, chalking it up to trauma or modesty, never guessing at the real secrets he was protecting. Over time, Manchester's immersion reached a point of near-flawless authenticity. To outward appearances, he was an irreplaceable part of the community fabric, and yet, he could never shake the underlying current of existential threat, knowing that a single misstep, one careless detail, could cause the entire elaborate edifice to come crashing down. So he walked through life as an actor in his own play, grateful for the applause but haunted by the knowledge that the curtain could fall at any moment. Defeated, due to a moment of carelessness, it was a cold December evening, and the city was awash with the glow of holiday lights. The stores teem with last-minute shoppers, and everywhere the scent of pine and cinnamon lingered in the air. Jeffrey Manchester, ever the careful chameleon, had been planning his next move for weeks. The ultimate heist, one that would close out the year and replenish the supplies in his hidden living quarters above the abandoned toy store. As he had so many times before, he rehearsed every step in his mind, mapping exit routes, watching employee shifts, and picking the most advantageous moment when staff numbers would be at their lowest. However, the holiday season proved unpredictable. Driven by a surge in business, store managers had increased staffing for the night, bringing in extra employees to handle the crowd. Jeffrey, accustomed to precision and order, didn't notice the extra bodies, at least, not until it was too late. The plan began smoothly, a masked man slipping through back corridors, blending with the shadows, methodically making his way toward the office where the store's cash was kept. But a sharp-eyed stock clerk, new to the team and not briefed on the old routines, noticed something amiss, a faint sound behind a partition, a silhouette shifting where none should be. Alarm flashed in the clerk's mind. Without alerting the others, she ducked under a counter, quietly dialing 911. Those 3 digits triggered a massive response across the city. The infamous rooftop man was rumored to be on the loose again, and no department wanted to risk another high-profile embarrassment. Within minutes, police cars silently formed a perimeter around the store, waiting for their moment to strike. Inside, Jeffrey was still in control, or so he believed. He moved quickly, as always, but as he headed for the getaway route he'd memorized days before, subtle warning signs started to appear. A radio whispering static in the wrong aisle, footsteps echoing faintly over the holiday music, a burst of light from the far window, flashing briefly on polished linoleum. Years of discipline kept him calm, but a creeping sense of dread began to poison his focus. He tried to adjust course, melting into the maze of storage rooms and service corridors, hoping his knowledge of the building's blueprints would outsmart the manhunt tightening outside. But unlike previous capers, there was hardly any margin for error. The store was alive with people, and unknown faces moved in and out unpredictably. As he checked his improvised escape hatch to the roof, he caught the distant flicker of blue and red just beyond the frosted glass. His window was closing fast. Meanwhile, the police entered stealthily from multiple access points, coordinating under hushed radio commands. They swept through the electronics store that adjoined the toy shop, finding evidence of recent tampering, a slightly ajar maintenance door, scuff marks along the hallway walls, and, most tellingly, a hidden attic panel that led to Jeffrey's makeshift sanctuary. Officers blinked in astonishment as they shone their flashlights into the cramped living space, packed meticulously with food stores, pilfered electronics, and a staggeringly large cache of high-end, unopened toys destined for who knew where. There was even a crude system of alarms, fashioned from spare batteries and motion sensors pilfered from other parts of the store. All the while, Jeffrey could hear their movements above and around him, the muffled thump of police boots on aged joists, voices filtering through vents, calling out search patterns and positions. He pressed himself against a cold cinder-block wall, heart pounding, brain racing as he debated every possible exit. There was no good option. Every hesitation, every frantic glance magnified his anxiety, and for the first time he realized just how thin the barrier between security and capture had become. Clutching his backpack filled hastily with essentials, he weighed the unthinkable: surrender, or a wild, desperate dash through the labyrinthine back halls. Ultimately, the odds were no longer in his favor. The once precise choreography of his operations now unraveled in the chaos of flashing lights, radio chatter, and the drawn faces of police waiting at every conceivable escape point. Despite his infamous cunning, Jeffrey's luck was outpaced by the sheer force of the police response. He made a final attempt to double back through a ventilation shaft leading to the loading dock. But new security cameras, installed just weeks prior after a string of local burglaries, broadcast his every movement to the on-site command post. Officers descended in coordinated waves, sealing doors and corralling him into a shrinking triangle of options. Finally, exhausted and cornered, Jeffrey was discovered in a crawl space above the electronics store, his face streaked with dust, eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and resignation. As the officers quietly moved in, weapons drawn but voices calm, the myth collapsed in those narrow, stifling confines. Generation of calculated escapes could not save him. One moment of unexpected vigilance by a low-level employee had tripped up years of elaborate planning. The arrest was quiet but monumental. They let him out, disheveled but remarkably composed, and cuffed him in front of a stunned crowd of onlookers and store employees. The legend had finally faltered, not through grand confrontation, but through a single, unforeseen mistake during a season meant for hope and second chances. The ending day of the Ghost. The endgame for Jeffrey Allen Manchester, infamously known as the Rooftop Man, unfolded with a mix of tension, inevitability, and bitter irony. After months of citywide tension, countless news stories, and a manhunt that drew law enforcement from all corners of the state, his life as a fugitive reached a dramatic conclusion, one both surprisingly mundane and strangely poetic in its finality. It started with a subtle hint, a whisper in the close-knit community network, a fragment of overheard conversation at a church gathering. Lily, the trusting woman who'd unwittingly let Manchester into her life and her heart, was troubled by odd gaps in his stories, by sudden disappearances, and by the hushed warnings she half remembered from whispered police bulletins. Out of loyalty and love she wrestled with suspicion, but the anxiety grew too great to ignore. When law enforcement discreetly approached her with new evidence, and with their careful plea for help, she faced a shattering decision: the safety of her family and neighbors, or the charismatic man who had become a fixture at every bake sale and scout meeting. On the day of reckoning, the trap was set with chilling normalcy. A child's birthday party at the community center, streamers, laughter, the scent of frosting and paper hats, became a stage for Manchester's final act. As he entered, perhaps sensing something was off, Lily's tense smile and the sudden presence of unfamiliar faces betrayed the carefully constructed normalcy he'd guarded for so long. At the signal, plainclothes officers melted out of the crowd, closing off every exit. Manchester's arrest was almost anticlimactic. No wild chase, no last desperate gambit, just a long resigned look at Lily, an outstretched wrist for the cuffs, and a faint ironic half-smile for the detectives he'd eluded for so long. He confessed his story in precise detail, his tone stripped of bravado but suffused with the weary candor of a man who'd carried too many secrets for far too long. The fallout rocked the community. Neighbors stared in disbelief at the news crews camped under the church steeple. Children who'd played games with the friendly volunteer tried to make sense of the grim spectacle. For weeks, local parents replayed every interaction, searching for the smallest missed sign. Shock gave way to a strange, uneasy relief, a collective exhale that the specter haunting their city had finally been named and caged. Yet, even with a 45-year sentence handed down, the ending felt ambiguous. Manchester left behind not just a trail of crimes but a lingering sense of vulnerability in every unlocked door and trusting handshake. He became, in the words of one headline, the ghost that walked among us. For all the law's certainty and the slow grind of justice, the lingering memory was of how convincingly he wore the human mask, how close he came to redemption, and how chillingly easy it was for him to slip back into the shadows at the edge of ordinary life.